Welcome back to the Transfer Show, and we've got some breaking news for you. James, bring us up to date.
Yeah, Arsenal forward Ethan Nwaneri is in France. He's about to have a medical with Marseille. Arsenal have agreed a loan deal with him until the end of the season. We expect this move to be confirmed in the next 24 hours. Now, this is a straight loan move here. He's seen as a key part of Arsenal's future plans, but this is an opportunity for him to get more game time. He's got a contract at Arsenal up until 2030, so important to note it's a straight loan. He will return to Arsenal in the summer, where surely next season he'll hope to get even more opportunities. But it seems a really good opportunity for him to play for a Champions League club, a club that are flying right now under a world-class manager.
And the Roberto De Zerbi, thank you very much, James. So let's get more on the move. European football expert Andy Brassell joins us. Andy, right on cue as well. Nwaneri, is he going to get plenty of game time at Marseille? How do you see the fit and where might he play? We've seen him be versatile at Arsenal.
Yeah, we have seen him be versatile at Arsenal, but clearly he's going to play in midfield if he's going to play for Marseille. That's where they're a little bit short at the moment. He's not playing on the right side of attack because you've already got someone cutting in on their left foot there, Mason Greenwood, who's having a fantastic season. His place is indisputable. But it's interesting, what De Zerbi has talked about throughout the season is what my team is really lacking is a number 10. So this is really interesting because I think we can look at the way that Marseille play and think, OK, we can see Nwaneri going into a sort of inside right position. I think it'll be a little bit higher than that. And seeing as De Zerbi has talked about having this sort of mysterious number 10 that he's going to build his team around, I think that is probably the thing that's got Arteta to intervene and say, you know what, I can see him working with De Zerbi and this will really be to the advantage of Arsenal going forward into the second half of 2026.
Exciting to see how it develops even when he gets into the team. A word on De Zerbi. He didn't really comment yesterday when asked about reports linking him with Manchester United. How would you, as things stand, rate the job he's doing in Marseille?
You know what? Marseille is such a sort of hotbed of overreaction, really. It's such a passionately followed club that it's really hard to get a handle on it. I mean, from the outside, he's doing a pretty good job. He got them back into the Champions League last season. It's been a little bit more complicated this season, partly because of the rise of Lens, who are top of the table at the moment, which is a remarkable story because they've got a fraction of the budget. And secondly, because they're in the Champions League and they've got this massive pressure, knowing that PSG have had a ridiculous schedule, knowing that they're carrying a load of injuries. And there's a bit of a sense of, we have to go and win the league this season, which you should never be feeling in France if you're a team that's not PSG. So, look, I would say overall he's doing a pretty good job. But then again, you go back to them losing their last home game against Nantes, and he's being torn off by every ex-player on television, on French TV, saying, oh, Marseille have not improved under him, which is patently false. So, look, I think he's learnt to be, you know, we think of him as quite an explosive character. He's learnt to be a little bit calmer there because you need to be a little bit calmer to succeed in Marseille because it is always such high tension all of the time. But look, until he gets to that next level, until he wins trophies, do we know that he can take care of a top Premier League club? Although, obviously, Manchester United are trying to be a top Premier League team rather than actually being one at the moment, you could argue.
Do you think, Andy, therefore, you mentioned the fact that he's calmed down a little bit since being in Marseille, that he would be ready to step in at a club like Manchester United? We've seen the likes of Ruben Amorim and Enzo Maresca be quite vocal when it comes to their thoughts on some of the recruitment policies and some of the things that have been going on above them upstairs. But do you think he'd be ready for that type of challenge? Of course, his focus is on the game this evening, but maybe looking into the summer.
Well, look, James, you know De Zerbi as well as me. He's never going to be the kind of guy who bites his tongue totally. You know, he just can't be that. He can't change what he is. But I think he may have learned to take a step back a little bit, certainly in public, which I think is very important. And if you look at how it unravelled for Ruben Amorim at Manchester United, a huge part of it was his inability to step back from what he really thought and saying that in public. And I feel like De Zerbi has got a little bit better about that. I think if you look at him even in the last 3 months, he's stopped having a dig at referees. He's taken a deep breath when a decision's gone against his team. And I think that sort of thing is really vital and shows the sort of personal growth that we don't always associate with coaches. You know, we expect top coaches to have such a big ego that they have their plan and they stick to it. And they think, this is what's worked for me and I'm never going to change. But I think De Zerbi has understood that if he's really going to reach that next level, he does have to modify his approach a little bit. And, that would definitely be the way to go in at Manchester United, because what brought down Amorim is his inability or unwillingness to change from what he always did.
Fascinating to hear that. Now, our top story, Andy, is that Jean-Philippe Mateta is asked to leave Crystal Palace. What we were wondering here is, with Juventus being one of the clubs interested in signing him, but not seemingly prepared to pay what Palace want for him, why aren't they stumping up the money? Is it tactics or is it just finances?
Well, they spent a lot in the summer, Teddy. They brought in a load of forward players. And that to me is why, to an extent, it's slightly surprising that Juventus are going for Jean-Philippe Mateta. But they know, of course, that they're going to be off the hook for Dusan Vlahovic's wages. He's injured at the moment, but he's leaving in the summer. He's out of contract. And unless he takes a massive pay cut, he won't be coming back. Other clubs are interested in him, led by Barcelona, who are, of course, always looking for a bargain, particularly when it comes to strikers and particularly when it comes to replacing Robert Lewandowski. But I think the problem is none of those forward players have really clicked so far. Jonathan David's form has been improved over recent weeks. Of course, Palace inquired about him when Juventus originally suggested the Mateta deal. I wonder if one that could come into the picture is Lois Openda, who came across from Leipzig. Of course, technically he's still on loan from Leipzig, so there would be a bit of manoeuvring to get themselves into a position to sign him. But if Palace could get someone of the quality of Openda, that would be a brilliant replacement, really, for Jean-Philippe Mateta, if indeed they have reached the point of no return. Because if it's a question of money, there are other clubs who could offer Palace more. I mean, we know from reports in Turkey that Fenerbahce are very, very interested. They're also interested in Omar Mamouche as well. They're really hell-bent on making a splash in this January transfer window. So Juventus are never going to be able to offer the money up front. Of course, they originally suggested a loan. But I think if we're talking about a possible replacement, then Juventus could really come into play as like a trade partner, I suppose you would say, in the NBA.
Andy, there's been so much interest in Jean-Philippe Mateta. We know Manchester United have a long-standing interest. Juventus clearly want to sign it in this transfer window. Does that tell us something about the quality of Jean-Philippe Mateta? But does it also tell us about the lack of number nines there are across Europe that are thriving right now?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say, James. And I think if you look at the position, for example, that we're talking about that Fenerbahce are in, they have got centre forward at the moment that a lot of people would want. They've got John Duran, and they're paying all of his Saudi wages. So you know that the money's there, and you know that they've got someone of, on paper, a lot of quality. He started 6 Turkish Super League matches this season with injury and scored 3 goals, including a really important one in the Intercontinental Derby against Galatasaray. But that's not enough. If they're going to get one over Galatasaray and get themselves to the top of the league, they need a striker who they can rely on. And as you say, I don't think there are many proper number 9s that are really out there. I mean, as we said recently on the channel, I think the thing with Mateta is he's just got a different profile to so many other strikers. And that, for me, makes him a strong possibility to get into the France national squad for the World Cup this summer. Now, no one in France has believed that it was possible, really, from when he originally got picked to the squad, because they've got so many good forward players. But it's a little bit like Olivier Giroud, if we go back a couple of years. The fact is, there is no one else shaped like Mateta for France. He offers a completely different option, and a lot of clubs out there are looking at him like that as well.
From a big central striker, let's talk about a big centre midfield player. And he reports today that Aston Villa want to sign Ruben Loftus-Cheek from AC Milan, who are, of course, in that Serie A title race. Do you think he'd be a good fit? How has he been playing this season?
He's played well when he's played, but they have been open to dealing him. And when I say dealing and trading, these are the appropriate verbs when we're talking about Serie A teams, because they don't have a bottomless pit of money. In a financial sense and in a prestige sense, I suppose, they're still recovering from Calciopoli, nearly 20 years on. And, this is not the league that it was in the 90s that can go out and spend extraordinary amounts of money on players. So there have been a few offers for Loftus-Cheek throughout the season. He's not always been a first pick, although obviously he's very technically adept and he's physically strong. They believe in him to do a job. They will want a replacement to come in if they get rid of him, but they're definitely open to dealing him. I just don't think, though, that we have the evidence from Ruben Loftus-Cheek. We know his best is very, very good. that he is in the place where he can play every single week for a Premier League team at the moment, although maybe Villa are not requiring him to do that.
Maybe not. We'll see what happens with McGinn and Boubacar Kamara in terms of injuries for Villa. Loftus-Cheek turns 30 this week. Let's talk Chelsea. In for centre-back Jeremy Jacquet from Rennes. What can you tell us about Jeremy Jacquet?
He's a thoroughbred. And it's because he's from the Rennes Academy. You look at some of the other players that have come out of there down the years and more recently. You know, it's a mark of quality coming out of the Rennes Academy. And that's why they can charge such big prices. And, of course, they're very, very well backed by the Pinot family, very, very wealthy backing. So they're in a strong position. Now, I think it was interesting to see Habib Beye nail his colours to the mast, really, for Jacquet earlier this week, where he said, look, if we want to do anything this season, if we want to push towards the top four, synonymous with the Champions League qualifying, of course, Champions League fourth place in France, then we've got to keep him, because you cannot get an equivalent player to replace him. Now, on one hand, he's a very typical Premier League sort of signing, because he's played just over 30 first-team games. So it's all about potential. It's all about you buying a player who you can mould into a superstar for the next 10 years. And that's really where you're getting your value for money. But it will be a lot of money. They've already rejected a €50 million bid. They're looking for something around 80 this January. So it will cost a lot to make it happen. When you see him, he's super convincing. He's elegant, he's poised on the ball, he's big and strong. Really everything that Lenny Yoro was when he was at Lille. So I think there's a bit of a comparison there. And then again, as I said, with the Rennes mark of quality, that's something else as well.
Would there be more wriggle room on their inclination, maybe the money, if there was a loan back to Rennes for the remainder of the season, if that's seen as key?
Maybe, I suppose, but look, they're under no pressure to sell. He's on a long contract. We've seen it before when, I suppose, a comparative thing with Chelsea is when Wesley Fofana wanted to leave St Etienne. You know, he went to the board and said, look, this is a life-changing possibility for me. Please, please, please let me go. And they held onto the balloon for longer than a lot of people expected, and they got to the cloud in the end, because they ended up getting, I think, 2.5 times what Chelsea initially offered. And, you know, maybe that deal's not weathered that well. So obviously Chelsea will hope, or whoever gets him will hope, Jacquet represents better value for money over time. I mean, obviously with Fofana, it's been injuries and a lot of stuff out of his control. But there is nothing pushing Rennes to let him go this month. That they say that only an extraordinary offer will make them blink.
We'll see if Chelsea can change their minds. Andy, it's been brilliant to have you on the Transfer Show. Thank you very much.
Thank you.